Okay, I believe we're live. So hi, Rico.
Hello, Andrew.
And we'll have a day of Photoshop, this time I believe focusing on select and mask and also on layers. And did you have something to say before we begin?
Well, it's a year of dog. I want to wish all the people or the viewer around the world who's watching this a happy new year. 新年快乐！希望我们的学生会在我们的 video 里面学到一点东西。Hope you guys would learn a lot from us. Thank you, Andrew.
Yep. Happy New Year. Happy Chinese New Year. Great. And then let me bring this down to that. And then I'm going to share my screen and go to desktop. And then here we are in, so I'll close that. All right, so you do see my screen, correct?
Yes, I do see your screen. Yeah.
I don't know why that is there. Put that down there. Okay, great. Okay, so let's start with the model here. Okay, and you can hear me just fine, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So for select and mask, what it is a lot of times people think that they need to make a selection first, and you don't really have to because they have a lot of similar tools that you would use from the toolbar in select and mask itself. So here I am in the background, and because I went from my move tool to a marquee tool or a selection tool, I will then see the select and mask option up in the top options bar. See, right at the top, select and mask. So all I do is I click on select and mask, and it brings me into this new view. So I'll move this out of the way. And I start off on the top right in the view. I go to onion skin, and I move the transparency down so I can see my image first. And I add a little transparency, but I want to see the image. And then here are my tools on the kind of panel here on the right. And so the top one is the quick selection tool, which is also similar to the quick selection tool that they have right in Photoshop. And so I start with that one. And you can see my brush is a little big, so I hit the left bracket. Yep, left bracket key to make it a little smaller. I could also, it doesn't work here, but if I were in Photoshop and I right-clicked, I could also bring up the brushes panel to change the size of my brush. But so what I do is I just start painting gently around her face and a little bit around the hair, and I bring it down. And I'm just doing a quick selection, which is selecting the model. I do a little bit down the middle. I go back up to top. I'm keeping away from the edges for now. I might do a little bit, but I pretty much just trying to select the model, select the subject. And I do a little bit down here. And then I do a little bit around her shoulder. And then I go up to the transparency. And if I go further, it gives me kind of a stronger showing of what I have that's being knocked out. So I might bring that up while I work on this, and then I go back down, add a little bit more here.
Can you zoom in a little more?
Yeah, it's just it kind of look pixelated, but yeah, so that's zoomed in. So you can see it's pretty good on the model. And then when I get to a certain part where it's pretty solid, and I just have kind of like the edges of the hair, then I go to the second tool, which is the Refine Edge tool. So the second brush down. And then what you do is a left bracket, again, make it a little smaller. And then the way to work with this is you try to go over the areas where the hair is. You don't want to really go too much where you already have it. See, because it kind of takes away. And then you have to kind of go back and, oops. I'll get to that. So, but Refine Edge tool, you kind of go over the hair areas that might have been on the outside. Yeah, see, so it picks up those kind of strands. See, so it's picking up those a little bit. And if it overdoes
We're using the Refine edge brush tool.
That's right. That's the second one down in this panel here. And then if it overdoes, what I do is I make the brush a little smaller with the left bracket, and I hold Option key, and then I can kind of take away. And then once you let go, it goes back to kind of adding. So you don't have to hold Shift or anything. You just. And then if you go down to the next tool, and that is just called the brush tool. And the brush tool is supposed to bring back parts of the image that might have gotten knocked out. Just be careful though, because if I go over the hair area, it brings back some of the background. It's kind of like makes a solid attempt at it.
Yep.
So yeah, see, so that's a little strong if I did it on the right side. So I might do the bring back. Yeah, see, it's kind of hard. So that area on the right is a bit hard. It looks like some of the other areas are pretty good, but it's kind of hit or miss. You know, sometimes it works really great, and other times it's kind of a mix. So yeah, so if I go here, I can see the transparency. This is, you know, showing the whole. So I move the transparency to get a better view. And then while you're working under the view area, if you click the little down arrow, you have other different kind of views. And it says if it hit the F key, you can cycle through them. So if I hit F, it goes to marching ants, then overlay, which is like a mask. And then, so I tend to want to preview by looking like on black, on white. Black and white's like a mask, and then just shows like it looks like on the layer.
It hit F1 or just
you cycle through F. You just keep hitting the F key. So I go back, it's F. I'm at onion skin. I hit it again. Marching ants, overlay, on black. So it's pretty good. You know, there's a couple little strange.
I'm sorry, I'm using a laptop. Where's the F key?
The F key on your keyboard. F. F is in Frank.
I don't see it. I only have F1 to F10, F12.
Well, you know, like your regular keyboard, like if you were typing something.
Yeah. Oh, the F. Okay. Okay. All right. I got it.
So F cycles through the views. Okay. So what I do is I just kind of go back to onion skin, and then there is like edge detection, but that will just kind of show you. If I go up here, that'll kind of just show you what the edges. Sometimes it brings it back, but a lot of times keep away from that. And then the global refinements, you can see that it says smooth, feather, contrast, shift edge. Smooth would like smooth the edges, but you know, you don't want to get it too soft. Feather would then also soften the edge.
Out.
Yeah, it would kind of blur it or soften the edge even more, which I don't know if you want to do either, because you want it to be kind of realistic. And then contrast will just boost the contrast. Maybe a little bit of that might help. It brings back a little bit of the color of the hair. And shift edge, I don't even know how that would be functional, because that would move the selection itself. So it kind of move it in or move it out.
Right.
So I keep away from that. And then when you go down to the output settings, it says decontaminate colors. If you click on that, as you can see, it adds a little bit more to the edges, which is good. So it makes a little bit more of a solid selection. And
what's decontaminate means?
Right. So what it does is it'll add more to the edges, and it tends to take out if there was like a background color. So if she was on like a blue background, it would take out the blue on the edges, so it would be more kind of a cleaner selection.
And we can control the amount, percentage of that.
Yeah, so and in this case it's subtle, so I'm just kind of keeping it at 100. And I like it because it's brought back more information in some of these kind of frilly hair areas. And then it asks what you want to do. So at the bottom, it's like, how do you save it out? And so if you click on the arrow, you'll see that you can create as a new layer, but that would mean it would just kind of knock out the background, I guess. And then I choose new layer with layer mask because I started with a flattened background layer.
Yep.
And then you could technically create a whole new document or new document with layer mask. But I'll just say new layer with layer mask. And it has a remember settings, which, these are just kind of defaults. And then I hit OK. And then now I'm back in Photoshop. So that's the original. and then that's after. So what I tend to do is it has the built-in layer mask on the right, and it's selected. You can see with a little white frame around it. I'll choose my brush, and I'll go over to my image. And I have a small brush now, and with the X key, I can switch from white to black. Black is now my foreground color, so I can use that to erase. So with black, I can paint in, kind of erase certain areas. So I'm using a small brush to kind of go in between where it just didn't pick up. And I just want it to be a little bit more smooth. So maybe left bracket even more for a smaller brush. So I can do really small strands. And then I switch over to white if I want to bring back certain areas like the edge of her shoulder. Okay, see where it kind of like took away. I make it a little bit larger with the right bracket. Yeah, makes it more solid. Okay, and then it sounds like you're moving some papers. You might want to put the papers down.
I'm writing notes.
Right, okay. So then I hit X again. I switch back to black. So when you're in the layer mask, black erases and white will bring back.
So when you're done, what I was trying to explain to students, a lot of times that you really have to test it on different color or background, depends on what background color or image you're using.
Correct.
And there's no one cutout for all images. It really depends on what you are working on.
Exactly. So we'll get to that in a second, where I'm going to put two different backgrounds, and you'll notice that should probably look a lot better on one than the other, which is probably the darker one. So yeah, it doesn't do a perfect job. And, you know, if I had time, what I would do is I would probably, you know, duplicate this layer. So when I have it, if I do a Command J, I can duplicate it, and then it might become even a little bit more solid. See? And then what I can do is I hit F a couple times so I can see what I have in the background. And if I go to Window, if you look in Window in general, if there's anything missing, like if your layers panel went away, that's where you would find any panel. So I could choose layers. But it also has a nice listing of any image or document that's open. So in this case, I can say I want the city image. I open that up, I grab the Move tool, and I just shift drag into the model image, and it goes there. So I hit F, so we have a full screen view. And I just,
why do you have to hit the shift key?
Shift just centers it. So
okay.
Yeah. So in this case, when you look at the image, you'll see that there's like these little kind of white areas or areas that are kind of bad. So it really is kind of hit or miss. Like some images, it does a great job. In other areas, it gets a little kind of soft. So in this case, what I would have to do is I might say, you know what, I don't really need that area. So let me delete that one. I go back to the layer mask, it's selected. I'm in the brush key, or brush tool, I should say. And then with black being my foreground, I go in and I can kind of paint away those areas, kind of clean it up. And this one might be a little harder because it's kind of blending a mixture of the two. You know, what I would probably do is, you know, if this was like a job that I was working on, I might decide that certain areas like this is better to be solid. And so I would switch over to the regular part of the layer, not the layer mask. And I might choose like the clone tool, make it a little bit larger, and then option click an area. And then, well, if it's not going to go onto the image because I've already subtracted with the layer mask, right?
Yeah.
So I would just create a new empty layer above and just make sure that it's set to all layers when I go to sample in my options bar. And then I option click, and then I can just kind of retouch over those areas and make them more solid. So that's what I would do when there's kind of areas that are problematic. Just clean it up with the clone tool, and just make sure that the clone tool brush is small enough that, you pick up detail and you're not picking up like large areas too much.
So you guys can see that what Andrew is doing is he selected all layers on the top menu bar there because we have 3 visible layers there. That's why it would sample both the background and the lady.
Right. Like, so the main thing is if I had it so that instead of all layers, it was set to current layer, and the layer that I have is
nothing on it.
Yeah, there's nothing on it, then I wouldn't be able to clone anything. So now it's pretty good. I mean, I could create it. I didn't do the best job, time of the essence, but that's what I do is I do my best with that select and mask tool. But if it's created kind of like some awkward or, bad areas where it's mingling with the background color, I might go back and just retouch those areas. And then in this case, what I would tend to do is if I like the cutout, I would right click and, even better, I go up to layer mask, and I say apply. And when I say apply, then it becomes just kind of cut out. There is no more layer mask associated with it. And then what I do is in the layers panel, I right click, and I'm a big fan of right clicking. So I would suggest anyone who's watching this to start experimenting with right clicking with various tools. So as an example, if I go to the move tool and I right click, I can choose the different layers by just choosing them through the contextual menu. And then of course, if I choose like a different tool, like the marquee tool, and I right click, I have various other different kind of options. So right clicking is extremely valuable. It's a great way that you don't have
I always tell them why click is your best friend.
That's right. I thought that was my line, didn't you? So
Maybe I heard from you.
So right clicking is your best friend. And so you just want to get comfortable trying it in when you're doing different processes, it's best to give it a try. So in this example, when I'm on the background copy layer, I will just right click and then I can say convert to smart object. Now when I convert to smart object, that's so when I can transform, it'll keep the original kind of pixels, the quality of the image when I resize. So what I do is I do a Command T for transform, and then you see a bounding box around the image. And then what you do is you hold Option and Shift. And by holding Option and Shift, you click a corner point and then you can make her smaller. So there she is, standing, I don't know what avenue that is in New York, but she's starting to look a little bit more kind of like sized correctly, as if she was standing in front of the middle of the street or something. Right? So something like that. And then of course, by making it smaller, that also, it's less noticeable to see some of the areas that were kind of taken out. But like I said, if I was concerned like about this area on the left, I would just retouch a little bit more, and I might lower the opacity so it's kind of in between solid and kind of see-through.
Yep.
So that's how I use the right click and made it a convert to smart object. So now just be aware that if you did want to paint on her or retouch some more, so as an example, I grab the clone tool. As I go, you'll get this symbol, which is saying you can't do anything on it because it's a smart
object to smart object.
Smart object. So what you have to do, oh look, it kept the hair from the last one.
Right.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so let me just go back real quick. So when I go back, I can see that that's what I did want with the image. So all I do is I choose the top one, and I do on a Mac Command E, on a PC Control E, and it merges. You got to be in the move tool, Command E. Okay, it's supposed to merge down. Command E. Okay, if it doesn't, then I right click and I say, wow, that's interesting.
It's Shift Command E, Shift Option Command E, I think.
Well, I've been able to just do it with Command E, so I don't know why.
Oh, just those two? Oh.
So now I just selected those two and did a Command E, and it merged those two.
Okay,
but normally I don't have to shift both. I normally just kind of click on the top one. But so now she's solid as one layer. Then I right click and I say convert to smart object. Command T for transform. Hold Option and Shift on a corner point, and then make her smaller. Click at the bottom and then move her down. So it looks like she's standing, getting her portrait in front of the use the left arrow key to kind of nudge it a little bit. Yeah, it's kind of fun. Okay, and like I said, it's a smart object. So if I right-click on the layer name, I can then go back to Rasterize layer. And that way I can then choose, as an example, the clone tool, and I can add a little bit more.
But in this case, if we already converted to smart object and rasterize back, so how does the resolution in this object?
Well, I only will convert it back to a rasterized layer when I know I'm not going to resize it.
Okay.
So the quality is still good because I used, smart object.
So they should, whatever you were working on, you should, once you finish your selection, it's possibly good to save a file separately.
Well,
rather than keep working here.
Yeah, I mean, you could have gone back in like when she was in the larger mode
and save a
I could have
PSD
right-clicked and then said duplicate layer, and then I could choose for document. I would just say new document, and then name it. So I could call it like model.
Yeah.
And then what happens is it jumps, and then it would just be her. But it could have been her like in the large version. So this is like a whole new document.
Right.
So
That's very helpful.
Right. So I'll go back to her here. Yeah. So that's doing the select and mask, and then a little retouching, and then using the transform tool to resize after converting it to smart object. So like I said, just once again, be aware to always try out the right click, because you get a floating contextual menu of options. So as you can see, I can duplicate the layer, delete the layer. I can even quick export as a JPEG. That's kind of fun. Convert to smart object, which is what we did before. And then now what I'll do, after having a little sip of water, is go over layers itself. Okay, so we have these. So whenever you open something, it starts off just saying background layer. So that's basically flattened. The image is flattened. And if it says background layer, and I choose as an example the eraser tool, and then I click and drag on my image, what it does is, since it's background and it's flattened, it will paint with white, which is the background color in the toolbar. Foreground color, background color. If I were to double click that background layer, technically, it becomes a functional layer. It's now a layer, not flattened background. So now when I use the eraser tool and I click and drag, you see transparency. And if I turn that off, you can see that that's what's behind. That's kind of a grid of transparency showing that I can cut through the image. Okay. So as you can see, that's the easy way to make a background flattened image a layer, just double clicking the name. And so just real quickly, the options we have is the bottom right is the trash can. So obviously if I click that, it would ask if I want to delete the layer, which I don't want to do. Second one is a new empty layer. So that would be if I wanted to try something such as create a new empty layer, and I click on my foreground color, and I'll choose this color. And if I want to paint, and always whenever you choose a tool, always go up to your options bar and check what your options are. So in this case, I want it to be a higher opacity. So I just kind of click over the word opacity and use a scrubby slider to pull to the right. And then in this case, I can just do something like this. Or maybe I'll do something kind of creative. I'll do this where I paint around. Bear with me, there's a method to my madness here. So I'll do something like this, and then I can go up to the layer blending modes, which I'll also go over a little bit later. And I can change it to, like, say, overlay, and then get like that type of effect. And of course, I can clean it up around the edges, but I mean, you can do some quick creative effects. And then let's see here. Let's move this over to this side. Okay, so yeah, so I can do something like that. And then one thing to know is, instead of like hitting the trash can icon, or what people tend to do is they click and drag down to it. Nowadays, if you have one of the last few years Photoshop, I mean, maybe even like 5 or 6 years now, you can just hit the delete key when that layer is selected and it'll go away.
Oh,
So yeah, so that's new empty layer where you can add color, or you can, retouch an element onto it. And then it goes to these adjustment layers. So a good example is, let me go to the top layer. Well, I'll just work it on here. So if I'm in this original layer and I went to an adjustment layer and I chose, as an example, levels, I bring it to the right. So levels is just a way to do like tonal corrections. So we have our darks, our midtones, and our lights. So the darks over, the darks get a little bit more dense. The midtones I can lighten if I go to the left, or darken if I go to the right. And then the highlights, if I move to the left here, I can brighten them a little bit. Now, you might say, well, what if I wanted to make the darks lighter or the highlights a little bit darker? Then you would have to go down to this output levels section. So for the darks, if I go here and I move this slider to the right, that would make the darkest areas a little bit lighter. But as you can see, it's pretty fast to make changes. So you want to use subtle movements. Otherwise, you'd be taking density out of your darks, out of your blacks. So I don't really use that too much. But if I thought that the highlights were too bright, I could go down here, and then as I move it to the left, you'll see it takes it down. But it does it overall, so you have to be kind of subtle with your movements. Well, my point is just trying to show you how adjustment layers work. So say I do something like this, and then I just kind of move that over. You'll see that it's now its own layer. So I can turn it on, turn it off, and it has a built-in layer mask on the right. And I'll kind of go further into how layer masks work. But basically, you saw it connected to the layer up here originally when I did select and mask. And the way it works is once you have a layer mask, you paint with black or white. So if I choose the brush tool and I'm in black, then I'm in that levels adjustment layer. So when I paint, it's getting rid of that brightest areas. So I can like bring back her hair a little bit more. See? And then you do get a preview of what I've done in the layer mask. So I'm holding Option to click on it to just show you the kind of layer mask. So wherever I painted in black, it erased, and whatever is white is being protected. So yes, you could also technically choose like a gray and then do like a middle kind of blend if you wanted to. Okay, so I hit Option again to get back. So the big difference between directly going to levels and using an adjustment layer is adjustment layer you can turn on, turn off. You have a built-in layer mask. And so I could save this as a layered Photoshop file, and I could come back in like whatever, a week or 2 weeks, and I could say, you know what? I think that the levels is too strong. And then I would click on the icon, levels would come back up, and then I could change it. So I could make it a little bit darker in the midtones. So I use adjustment layers when I know that I might be coming back and making changes in the future. And I save that as my part of my layered Photoshop file. Now, I'll delete that. If I didn't care about that, if I didn't think that I was going to make any changes and just a quick change, then you can go up to Image, Adjustments, and that's where you find all these direct tools like levels, curves, and then these are like color tools, right? So I use keyboard shortcuts. So instead of going to like Image, Adjustments, Levels,
Command L.
Right. So you'll see on the right, it says Command L. And so it always has the shortcut on the right when it has a shortcut to bring it up. So I would do just Command L, and then I would do the same type of adjustments where I make it maybe brighter in the midtones. And then when I hit OK, you'll see that there's no layer there. It's not an adjustment layer. So that's directly applied to the bottom layer. And if I save that, that's it. That means that I've kind of etched it or saved it into the image. So if you know it's a simple change you're going to make, you can just go directly to Image, Adjustments, and choose one of these tools, or get familiar with the shortcut But if it's something that you know that you want to be able to go back and make changes, you know, I do that and I'm like, what was I thinking? It's too dark. I come back, click on it, and I can just bring it back.
So what Andrew was explaining to us is the difference between going into editing in the image and also just go in to use the mask, the adjustment layer.
Right. So the adjustment layer is like non-destructive. You can go back and repeatedly make changes because it's technically it's its own layer. So I can turn it on, turn it off. I can go into the layer mask. Otherwise, if I go directly to image adjustments when I'm in layer 0, then anything you do here with these tools goes directly onto your image. And if you save it, that's it. So it's for me, it's always a choice. If something I know I'm going to go back to, I use an adjustment layer. If it's just a simple tweak, then I'll just go directly.
I think it's good to, if you're trying to create different mood or different color with one image.
Okay, great. So so that's a good point. So besides like functional, like here's your levels and curves, which is your tonal range, and then here's different kind of color, boost, hue and saturation. You can change the quality of color or the saturation or the vibrance. You also have things like this, where you can go to solid color, and just for sake of, I'll change the color. And then you're like, well, what good is that? But that's just, you know, it's beginning state where you're just kind of bringing it in like that. And then what you do is you go to your blending modes. So while I'm in here, first, once again, you do have a built-in layer mask. So I could choose the brush again. Okay, make sure it's the brush and not any other brush. See, so you have color replacement and mixer brush. You want the regular brush. Otherwise, these won't work with the layer mask. You'll get this kind of icon. So brush tool. And then if I were going, and I can't really see it, but I could bring down the opacity. And then I could go in and I could paint areas, you know, for a different effect, whatever, you know. But mainly the way I work with it is if I do something like that solid color, I can change the layer blending mode. Now, the thing to know about layer blending modes is once you choose the first one, you can just hold on a Mac Shift plus. Oh, and you have to be in the Move tool. So when you're in the Move tool, you do Shift plus, and it cycles through. So then you can see these kind of different interesting effects. That's a little pixelated, but you'll see that it kind of blends interesting. So there you kind of get like almost a duotone effect and brightens and goes through color dodge, linear dodge. So you get these different effects just by cycling through. So I mean, that might be like a creative effect you like using the overlay mode. And soft light. So I really like the layer blending modes if I want to kind of deviate from just general tonal correction and color correction. If I want to do a creative effect. Cool. Yeah, see, so like this could be like a CD cover or something. And then of course you could flatten that layer down with this one and then retouch out these kind of pixelated areas if you wanted to.
Yeah, this goes back to every different background color. You have to do a little more work.
Right. So that's a good point too. If I'm working on this and I'm like, okay, I like this effect, so I'll go to overlay. I'm like, but you know what? I really kind of want her to have like a red or magenta kind of push, a look to it. I can double click on the solid color, and it brings me to the color picker. And then I could choose in the bar, I could choose like a red or a magenta. So I'll do like a darker, yeah. And then if I like the effect, I can turn it on, turn it off. But if I like the effect, but I think it's a little strong, I can just go up to opacity. And then with the scrubby slider, I move my cursor over the word opacity and move to the left. I can bring down the intensity.
Yep.
So that's how you can do these type of effects. And these type of effects are becoming bigger and bigger on Facebook and Instagram, especially Instagram, this kind of color grading look, color toning look. And that's also something I can show you later if you want. But that's just, you know, going over the options of adjustment layers. Okay, so I'm going to do another duplicate of that. And to duplicate a layer, it's just Command J. I'm going to put it over the city. And because she's above the city and she has a background, you don't see anything.
Yeah.
You don't see through.
It's all solid.
Yeah, it's solid. And so you have to think, the way I describe layers is like a pizza. Um, the bottom layer is like your dough. And then the second layer would be like the tomato sauce. The third layer is like cheese. The fourth layer is pepperoni or vegetables. And then if you take like a cutter and you cut through, first it cuts through the sausage or vegetables, and then it gets to the cheese, and then it gets to, the sauce, and it gets down to the bottom. So that's how layers work. The
Now
top.
I want some pizza.
Yeah, right? That's what you're having for lunch today. But yeah, you have to think of it as, progressive. Whatever's on top, you have to cut through that to get to the next layer. So therefore, if I'm on this layer 0 copy at the top, the next option I go to, and just to let you know, with this one, we kind of jumped this one that looks like a folder. That's just if you wanted to organize. So if I'm working on a job where I have a lot of layers connected to, like, say, her face or something, like say I have like her face and then her eyebrows and then under her eyes, or just a bunch of things related to that, I could select by shift clicking, I could select a grouping of the layers. And then what I do is I do a Command Option Shift and click on that layer, which brings up new group from layers. And then I could say like retouched. And then they all go into this. You can't really see because it's, just the image, but I turn it on, turn it off. It's all those 3 layers go into that folder, which is pretty great.
Organizing folder.
Yeah.
It's
a great way of working when you start getting.
You have to know how to organize it.
And I don't really want that, so I'm just going to do Command Z. And then just in general, if you wanted to go further, you do Command Option Z, or on a PC, Control Option Z. And so you go back to, and then what I'm going to do is just bring it back above. Okay, so Command Z goes back 1, Command Option Z is multiple. And then what happens is, if I go to the next one, that is the layer mask. So if I click on that, it adds a layer mask to any layer. And so that's what's behind. So if we're in the layer mask, you see a white frame around it. And then I have black as my foreground color. I choose my brush tool. And while you're working with the brush, you can right click, and up comes the panel temporarily where you can change the size or the hardness. And so if I want it, I tend to like it to be soft, so it's set to 0 hardness. But if you want it to be like very sharp on the edges, you could move it up to there. And then once I click, okay, so it's set to so this is why you always, when you work, you always should look up at your options bar. So somehow the brush got changed to dissolve mode, and I want it to be normal. So it's set to normal, and I paint, I can erase. See? So I'm erasing nicely to bring out the background. And what I tend to do is I hit the left bracket for a smaller brush when I'm by the edges. Okay. I'm not going to do a perfect job, but I'm just going to show you the general.
Right.
And then if you did want to, for some reason you wanted to do a partial kind of erase, you could bring down the opacity. So I make it like, 50, close to 50. Yeah, 50. And then when I erase it, it's kind of partially erasing. So that's just, I guess, if you had a certain effect in mind. But in this case, I do want it to be solid. So I just grab the word opacity, the scrubby slider comes up, see the hand with the 2 arrows, and I pull it to the right. And then when I paint, it's solid. So around the model, I use a smaller brush, and then I hit the right bracket for larger brush when I'm doing bigger areas. And of course, it's not going to be perfect because we didn't do the select and mask on this image, but I'm just kind of showing you how layer masks work. So here's where I did a large brush and it kind of faded into her arm. So what I would do is I would switch it back or hit X. So white becomes my foreground. I choose a smaller brush and then I go over the edge and then it makes it more solid. So yeah, so that's layer masks, which are built in once you click on the layer mask icon. And then we have this effects area, which is like layer styles. And you can do like bevel and emboss strokes. So a lot of these are for type, and I'm not really going to get into that. Maybe we can create a lesson that's just on type and type effects.
Yeah, sure, that would be great.
Yeah. So we'll go over all
So
these.
that one there has the emboss and deboss, drop shadow, and
That's right. So a lot of those are for type. I mean, you could technically, let's go here, choose just a layer. I could also do like color overlay, and then it kind of focuses on that selection. And then right here in this layer style panel that comes up, I can go to blend mode and I could change that to overlay, and then the opacity. So I could do that kind of style and see how it's interconnected. So it's, here's the layer, and then underneath says effects, color overlay.
you
So
can turn them on and off.
Right, so you can turn it on and off. And if I didn't want it, I would just click the name effects and drag it down
to the trash. Or you can put it on the pictures too.
That's a great point. So say, let's go back. Good point. Yeah. So if I do Command Z, it comes back, right? So that Command Z undoes and it comes back. Now, if I was like, well, let's see, can I get it to go onto, yes, so I can get it to go onto the city image.
That's cool. Now it's nighttime, evening time.
Right. And then if you wanted to, here's another trick. You could keep it on her, and then you could also put it onto any other layer by Option or Alt on a PC, dragging to that layer. So if I Option drag, you'll see that it's connected to this layer and to this layer. See? So that's Alt drag or Option drag on a Mac that affects. You can drag it to any layer. So I'll tend to do that when I'm working on a kind of creative project. But we don't necessarily need it on the background, so I'll just drag it to the trash. And for the sake of the lesson, I'll just take it out. And then the last icon is just this kind of link icon. So if I click that and you see the little link to that, that means that if I choose the Move tool and I move this, you'll see the city and the model are moving at one. They're moving together. So
in Photoshop, you get, I know this is your second lesson, always have to make sure what layer you're working on and what layer you're moving. A lot of times that's correct. One layer, you're not sure what you're moving, and you could be moving something in between and you didn't even know it.
Right. So like if I thought I was on the model layer and I wanted to move her, right?
Yep.
But I was really here and I go to move the model layer, then all of a sudden the background's moving. So yeah, be kind of what I call it professionally paranoid and double check like what layer you're on all the time. And always, whenever you choose any tool, so I choose even like this dodge and burn type of tools, always look up to your options bar, because your options are what controls the effect or the power of what the tool is doing. So, and once again, remember that you can right click on things and you have a lot of options related to that. So, one option is if you're working on a project and there's something you still wanted to work on, like say you wanted to retouch or something, you could right click and you could color code it. So then that could be like a different kind of symbol for yourself to let you know that it's still work in progress.
That's how you organize your layer. A lot of times that you're working at different group and different items on maybe you have a coupon on the right hand corner, and then you have the image. You're going to use the image for like 3 different modes, then you would be able to color code it.
Sure. And then what I'll do is I'll do something like this. Like if I'm doing a retouching job, I've created a bunch of actions. So I have all these actions I've created, which I got to send these to you if that would kind of be a nice gift for you, right, Rico?
That would be great. Just action. We can talk about action.
Yeah, that could be a lesson in itself, is creating actions. But as an example, I created one like this where retouched by where and of course it has a different effect on the different resolution, but I can go in and I can change it so that it's a bit more solid. And then where's the distance here? It's just kind of a watermark I create. And I'm going to just drop shadow and then change the distance of that. So it's a little bit more readable. but I'll do something like this, right? When I'm working on a project, and then I will send this to my client and then say, so what do you think? Of course, I would have clean edges. It'd be, a real retouch job. And then if they say good, and then they send me, payment, then I take this off and I flatten it and send them a high-res version. And I like to use WeTransfer. I'm a fan of WeTransfer for sending like large zip files. And some people use Dropbox. I also have Google Drive. So sometimes I upload to my Google Drive and then send the link. But so my point is like by labeling, if I have a layered file, I can right click and I can put the color red, which reminds me, do not flatten this with this layer on if I'm busy. For most part, I think I'd be smart enough to know not to do that. But it's just a way to kind of remind myself this does not go on the final.
Yep.
Okay. And once again, if I don't need it, I just hit delete while that layer is selected and it goes away. Okay, so one thing that we could go over a bit more is, so I went over these tools down here, but some of the options up here. Now, they have this new kind of search thing. So you could search by, like if you had a lot of layers, you could search by name and then you hit name and then you would type it in the field. So I could say layer 3 and then it just goes directly to layer 3.
Oh, is that a new thing?
Yeah, I think in the last couple editions of Photoshop.
Oh, okay.
But, and then here it's set to kind. And then, so if you click on these icons, you'd be able to like search by, specifics. The thing that I don't like about it is it tends to, as you can see, make other things disappear when you click on it. So if you forgot about it, if you forgot that you're using this, you might forget that you have another functional layer that you should be working on. So I don't really, if I have a small number of layers, I don't really worry about this. This is more like if you're working on an intense project with multi-layers, a lot of layers, then you might use this to search for specific criteria to find that layer.
Okay.
But what I do...
that's when you have like over maybe 20 layers.
That's correct.
People always have a name for it.
20 layers, 50 layers. Yeah. I've worked on...
You used to get files from other people that don't really know how to use Photoshop that has 200 layers. Yeah. And everybody is really afraid of getting his file.
Well, that's where things like the right clicking come in hand. I mean, if you get some of these images that other people worked on and you're not too keen on the way they've organized it, you can right click, and then this is how you can easily go to like the layer underneath. So I've worked on projects where I've had like 500 layers, and so as an example, I did something for like the Intel Developers Forum, and I did these big banners for Intel, and there was like a woman who was pressing kind of like a virtual reality, pressing into the sky or in front of her, and then these globes and kind of swirls kind of burst out. So I had to use a lot of layers, so I organized them with that folder and created like, swirls, globes, whatever. And that's how I would kind of keep it organized, is there were so many layers that I would have to right click and then be able to go to just a little bit of layer underneath to tweak a little bit of a pixel, like a twirl or something. You know what I mean? So it comes in handy. But now the thing I want to go over was like, if I'm in this layer, we have these layer blending modes. So as I said, if you go to the first one, and I think you probably can do it right from the get-go, is if I hold Shift plus, as long as I'm in the Move tool, if I do Shift plus on my keyboard, I can cycle through these layer. So as you can see, right from the get-go, you can get some pretty creative effects.
Yeah.
So here's the model set to, in the blend mode, darken mode, and it knocks out things. So what it's really doing is all kind of too much to explain, but these little sections, these are like the darken modes: darken, multiply, burn. This is how
you guys would be able to do a lot of creative stuff on just understanding going through this menu. And what I would suggest you to do is just maybe every single one just save a separate JPEG and then print it out all at once, and you can see what they are.
Well, I don't know if I'd go through all that work, but I mean, the main thing is that, this is like darken mode. So this is how like the top layer will interact with the bottom layer or the layer underneath. And it works by, darkening or multiplying. And then the next ones would be like lighten, and how it lightens it and how it affects the layer underneath. But, and then this is kind of like middle range. And also this is very good for like textures. Like if you go to overlay and you had like a person's face and you put like a photo of rocks or leaves, you could have them blend with the face very nicely. But my point is that even though we have like darken, lighten, and then kind of mid-tone range, and then these are kind of like, poster, like kind of stylization effects, and then we have color-based functionality. I don't get too caught up in needing to understand what those sections do. I just want to see how they work. So what I'll do is, if I'm in the normal mode and I'm in my selection tool, the top tool, I can just Shift plus and cycle through, and then whatever basically works is what I might work with. So this is darker color, and then I might go to the layer mask and then paint out around the hair, so it's just her face, and the face is floating over the city. So my point is, if you just Shift plus, you cycle through the layer blending modes until you find something that works for you. That's a pretty cool effect too, right?
Yeah. Andrew, I had to go to another meeting.